Ian Dowding.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for a very nice welcome. I've got some neck oil here, so if I need to lubricate my throat, you'll forgive me taking a swig from there. And I've got some notes as well, because I've got to condense this. I usually do talks about this subject for about 45 minutes, and I've only got 15 tonight, so I've had to sort of make a list with bullet points so I remember to tell you everything. But I usually do it for groups like the WI, and you look a lot less scary than them. But I never, I've not I've not had a slow hand clap yet, so I'm doing all right. So it's going to tell you about this. This is rather strange. I do this talk quite a lot, and I'm always surprised that people take such an interest in something that's basically just a pudding, a dessert, if you like. And to start at the beginning, really, the reason I came down to this neck of the woods in 1968 was to take a job. And I trained as a chef, and I'd had a year in the restaurant industry. And I came down here to take a job and not so far away from here, just 2 or 3 miles over the downs to a village called Jevington. I'd met this couple called Susan and Nigel Mackenzie, and they bought a building. They bought a tea rooms and a guest house there, and they were going to turn it into a restaurant. And I'd met them, and they got it all worked out. Nigel was going to be in the bar greeting people. Susan was going to do the cooking, and she had a sister called Jennifer who was going to be doing the dining room. And I asked if I could come along and just be a general dog's body, because I found it rather exciting, a new restaurant opening. And so I came down in May of 1968, and when I arrived, they offered me the job of head chef. And I was only 18. I thought, blimey, this is good. And but I say head chef, but I mean I had to be a head chef because I was the only chef. So I had no assistant or anything like that. So I had to do everything. And they had taken these premises, and they had turned it into and they changed the name of it to the Hungry Monk. And some of you may have heard of it, of course. And it, of course, is not there anymore. But the building is still there, and it's still a lovely building. Now, the thing is, you have to remember, I mean, I'd done 2 years at college, and I'd also done, as I say, a year in another restaurant in Berkshire. And you have to cast your mind back. I'm sure there's some people here who can cast their mind back to 1968. If you think about it, things were very different in those days. I mean, there was no such thing as a ready meal. You couldn't go to a supermarket and buy a ready meal. You couldn't, if you were a chef and you had to create a menu, you had to cook every single thing on that menu from scratch. You couldn't ring up Break Brothers and ask for sort of 24 boil in the bag coq au vin or 24 cheesecakes or anything like that. You had to make everything yourself. So that was why my training came in quite well, because we were taught the basics. We were trained at college in the way that Escoffier said that young chefs should be trained, and so I was quite well grounded in that. So when I arrived at the Hungry Monk, I think the problem was that the idea of them opening a restaurant was very exciting when they first decided it. When it actually came to the nitty-gritty, I think they both started to get real cold feet because they had no experience whatsoever in the restaurant trade, and so they looked on my training as being something that of an advantage. And I think at the same time that Sue, who's going to do the cooking, had realised when it came nearer to the day that cooking for 50 people from a multi-choice menu with everybody arriving at different times was actually something a bit more scary and very different from doing a dinner party at home, which was why I was offered the job of chef. So it was the training I'd had before, the restaurant in Yattendon in Berkshire, was I was second chef there, but again there were only 2 chefs in the kitchen, so I was still sort of first commie, last commie, and the sort of floor scrubber as well. The chef I worked with there, his name was Russell, and he was he's a strange guy, but he did very good desserts. Apparently, this restaurant was very well known for its desserts. And but Russell had his secret recipes, which was a bit silly, really, because as I was his assistant, if he wanted me to help him, he was going to have to let me know what those recipes were, otherwise I couldn't help him. And so I learnt all the different desserts and all the ways of running a restaurant from the kitchen point of view from Russell. Now, there was one dessert that Russell used to do that he didn't do very often because it was a bit tricky. There was a problem about it that it made him not do it very often. And I talked him into doing it one day, and it was a very good dessert. Apparently, he worked in America, and he brought this back from America, and it was called Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie. And basically, it was a round pie dish filled with the soft toffee, and then topped with coffee-flavoured cream. Now, as I say, he had these secret recipes, but it was no secret that actually it didn't work very well, because if you boil up sugar and butter and cream and golden syrup, and you boil it to different degrees of temperature, you will end up from a range of things, from caramel right up to Everton toffee. Well, if you've ever had Everton toffee, they used to sell hammers for Everton toffee. So if you got it wrong, either it didn't set at all, or it would be as hard as nails. So when Russell got it wrong, which he did quite often, I learned an awful lot of interesting words that weren't exactly culinary French, but it did make my vocabulary much wider. All chefs are good at swearing. Well, you've heard Gordon Ramsay, so you know all about that. So I put this on the back burner, not literally, but I put this on the back burner to not do it. I had my notebook, which I'd taken with me down to the Hungry Monk, and the menu comprised all those things I'd been learning at college and I'd learnt at this place in Berkshire, and all the desserts I put on the menu there were what I'd learnt in this time, except I put Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie in there, but I put a big question mark by it. After about a year or so, my sister came to visit me at the Hungry Monk. She had started off being a shorthand typist and found it exceptionally boring compared to my life, which she thought sounded rather exciting, being in the catering industry. And one day I received a postcard from her, and she's working on cruise ships going down the Rhine. And so she's gone into the business that I was in, and she had rather good time there, from what I gather. And she came to see me at the Hungry Monk, and because the restaurant was getting busy, it was getting very popular, she was offered a job. I'll tell you something. I'll take a short detour here. I'll tell you about the fact that when you open a restaurant, you have to make sure that in the first few months you get it right, because you're going to get everybody in the local area is going to come and try you out. People actually use that phrase, "Oh, we're going to try you out," they say like that. Well, if you don't get it right, then people won't come back, so you're going to fail. And it was a fact then, and it's a fact now, that 2/3 of all restaurants that open close within the first year because people get it wrong. They get the sums wrong very often. And so we did quite well, actually, because we had this. We must have got it right. Nigel was a very good businessman, and he was very good at doing things that would make people come to the restaurant. He was very good at promoting it. And when my sister arrived, did I say everything there? Yep, I think so. When my sister arrived, and she worked with us, she was telling us about these cruises down the Rhine, and she said to us, she said there was one chef on board ship, she said, and he was a huge guy. He was Greek, she said, and he was incredibly strong, and she said he could lift a stock pot with one hand. And I said, really? So she said, yes. She said, even when it was full. I said, oh, come on. No, she said, even when it was full of cans of condensed milk. And I said, well, why would he put condensed milk into a stock pot? She said, well, he used to boil them up. He said, she said, I'm not supposed to tell you this. She said, it's a secret, she said. Well, another secret recipe, see? So it's a secret. And he says, if you tell anyone else, I kill you, he said. Anyway, it's the first person who tells it to me. So the following week, I go to the cash and carry and buy a case of cans of condensed milk, put them in the stock pot. This time I did put it on the back burner. Filled it with water and then boiled them up. And you boil them for 3.5 hours. And you must make sure you don't boil the saucepan dry, otherwise they start exploding. And we'll talk more about that a bit later if you like. And sure enough, we opened one of these cans after I didn't believe it was going to work, And I opened it, and there's this beautiful, soft, firm, silky, dark toffee. And every single can was the same, so you got a perfect result. You didn't have to worry that it wasn't going to work because it worked every single time. And so I recreated in the restaurant Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie. And it was very, very popular. All the customers liked it. All the waitresses liked it. They were always going to the fridge and taking a little bit of Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie. There's only one person who wasn't terribly happy with it, which was Nigel Mackenzie, the owner of it, because he was always tasking me to improve things. I'm sure we can make it even better than this. And this is what he said about Blum's Coffee Toffee Pie. He said, it needs another layer. It needs something else. So I thought, oh, God, here we go again. So we tried it with some pecan nuts, so it'd be like a sort of pecan pie. And we tried it with a layer of apple in it, which actually was quite nice. And we tried it with peaches and things like mandarin oranges. And then one day, I was making yet another version of it. And I had some bananas. And as soon as I started prepping the bananas, because I had my basic pastry case and this lovely toffee in the middle on the layer of that, and then as soon as I started prepping the bananas, because if you slice them like that rather than like that, of course they fit perfectly around a round tart tin. And so I thought, oh, this seems about right, And so we put that. I made it like that, and then it seemed to be the people did really like it. There was something about that combination of toffee and bananas and coffee-flavoured whipped cream, and but now there was somebody else who wasn't very happy with it, and that was the young lady who had beautiful handwriting, and she used to do the chalkboards, the chalk blackboards, and before she'd been writing Coffee Toffee Pie. Now she had to be writing Coffee Toffee Banana Pie, and she got a bit fed up, saying there's not enough room on the line for it now. So Nigel Mackenzie was there at the time, and I had to give him credit for this, because he said, okay, he said, we'll make a portmanteau word out of the syllables. And so he said Banoffee, the first thing he came up with, Banoffee. And we thought that sounded all right. Remember, this is in the days when there were some very silly menu titles, things like Lucy Moxon's Lemon Posset, and Gypsy Pie, and or Gypsy Tart or whatever, and Wim Wham. That was another one. That was a sort of Regency trifle, and they were, so we didn't think anything of it. All we did was we spelt it with an I at the end to make it look like it was sort of a bit Italian, a little bit continental, and it went on the menu like that. So that seemed to work, and everybody seemed to like it. And we got to the point where, we couldn't take it off the menu because people would ring up and say, can you make sure you've got your Banoffee Pie on the menu? So the other thing as I was saying about Nigel being rather good at promoting the restaurant, one of the things he decided to do was to bring out a cookery book of the different dishes that we used in the restaurant. And everybody said he was mad. No other restaurant was doing anything like that before. And even the customers said, well, you're balmy if you do that, because then people will be able to cook your food and they won't want to come to the restaurant. Well, that's patently not true, because people go out to dinner for much more than finding dishes they can't cook at home or anything like that. And of course, it was a very clever move because it was an advertisement as well. And it's an advertisement that actually made a profit, because people took that book home with them as a souvenir. They had it at home, so it was a reminder that restaurant was there for birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. And so the first Hungry Monk cookery book came out just before we came up with the idea of the Banoffee Pie. And so the first, which was actually called, going on the whole theme of secrets again, it was called The Secrets of the Hungry Monk. And there was a very nice regular customer we had there who was a monk, or he was a monk. His name was Graham Jeffries. And he'd been a monk, but he stopped being a monk and became a vicar because he wanted to get married, which really was sort of rather sweet. He was also a cartoonist, and he used to bring out these books of little drawings and cartoons of monks. And we employed him to do some of these cartoons for the book. And it was a very original idea that there was a cookery book, but if everything went wrong, at least you could laugh at the cartoons. And so that was very popular. And then the Banoffee Pie thing happened, and that was in 1972. And after that, a further book came out called The Deeper Secrets of the Hungry Monk, and the Banoffee Pie recipe is in there. Now, I've never made a claim that I was the first person to put together toffee and bananas and cream, because I'm sure many people have done that in the past and probably since independently. But I know for a fact that regardless of that, the name cannot be predated from 1971, when we stood in the kitchen at that little kitchen, that restaurant in Jevington, when Nigel first uttered the word Banoffee. And that cannot be predated, even though everything else can. And the reason that was important is because only with that name did we know that when people copied that, it was our idea that they were copying. And it started to become famous just locally. So other pubs got hold of the books. We heard that young people who were going out to ski chalets to cook for people on holiday there, took the books with them. I remember going down to visit my parents in the West Country, and I stopped in Midhurst, and there was a restaurant that had, and I looked and it had Banoffee Pie on there, and it had some of the other things that were in the Hungry Monk cookery books as well. So it was becoming very popular. We also started to hear rumours, but it was popular with the royal family. Don't know how true that is. Never had it confirmed, but we heard it as a rumour. And Margaret Thatcher actually served it for state dinners at Number 10. Not she made it herself. She had her minions to do that, you know. So that became the sort of first spread of how Banoffee started to go around and get known. And we didn't think anything of it. As I say, we were thinking up different menus. The chefs always borrow phrases from other things, like you call something a croustade, or you call it a petivier or something like that, even though it's sort of a borrowed term. So there was nothing sort of strange in doing that. And I remained in the restaurant business until the year 2000. I mean, I was at the Hungry Monk for the first 20 years of it. So I was the head chef there for the first 20 years. And then my wife and we had our own restaurant for a while in Seaford, which was called Quincy's. And then in the year 2000, we decided to do something completely different. And my wife had a thing she wanted to do. She was into interior design, and so she wanted to do something connected with that. And I suddenly found myself without a job, actually, because there was just trying to think. Sorry, I had a brain freeze there as well. I'll get my reminder out, and I'll have a swig of beer if you don't mind as well. Cheers. We were going to buy a pub. That was what it was. And by the time we sold our restaurant, the pub had been sold. It took so long to sell the restaurant. And so my wife had to open this shop for interior designs, and I was without a job. But I had a friend who was a chef, who was a freelance chef. He couldn't have been anything else but a chef, really, because his name was Colin Capon. And he was a very nice guy. He was very interesting. And I rang him up and I said, look, I'm thinking of doing what you do, doing freelance chef. And I said, I don't want to tread on your toes or anything like that. He said, well, don't worry about it. He said, there's plenty out there for both of us. He said, and you'll do really well. He said, but I'll give you some advice, which he did. And one of the bits of advice he gave me was that he said, you need to make sure you've got a USP. to sort of give people reason to hire you and for things to go around. And I said, well, what sort of things do you mean? And he said, well, you know, he said, have you ever worked with any celebrity chefs? And I thought, no, I haven't done that. And he said, have you ever worked in any high-profile restaurant like Savoy or Le Gavroche or something like that? So, no, never done that as well either. So, and suddenly I thought, actually, I do have a USP, actually.
Wasn't that fantastic?
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much. You see, I don't know why. It's a pudding. That's all it is. It's just a pudding.
It's just a pudding. It's not just a pudding. It's Banoffee Pie, and we have the man who was involved in the evolution and creation of it. That's the creation of Banoffee Pie. I mean, that's a stunning story, isn't it? That was just delightful.